The African American Legend series highlights the accomplishments of blacks in areas as varied as politics, sports, aviation, entertainment, and religion. We will explore how African Americans have succeeded in areas where they had been previously excluded because of segregation, racism, and lack of opportunity. I'm your host, Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Jr., and with us today is Hazel N. Dukes, the president of the New York State NAACP. Hi, Hazel.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Now, we're going to talk about the legacy of Martin Luther King, Jr. And you are from Montgomery, and you probably knew Martin Luther King, Jr. long before the rest of us did. Tell us about your experiences with King, Dr. King in Montgomery, Alabama.
Well, Dr. King went to Montgomery, Alabama as a minister at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Dexter Avenue Baptist Church has been a historic church for professionals, African Americans professionals, the teachers, the doctors, the postmen at that time in the railroad.
The people who had money.
Money. And so it was a historical church. It was a church for him to go to, a young man. It was coincidental that when the older ministers was not ready for the revolution that they had, the man who really no one really talked about, his name was E.D. Nixon. They just named a street after him. He was the president, they call it then, of the Brotherhood. That was the Pullman Porters. E.D. Nixon did not work for the city. He did not work for the state. He was not a teacher. So he was the man really that coalesced and got people together. But it's interesting, at that meeting, I'm told by people who was living, Miss Johnny Carr, who is deceased now, she was a great friend of Mrs. Rosa Parks, friend of my mom's and my grandmother's, said that night, they said there's a young man that just came into Montgomery. His name is Martin Luther King, Jr., and we need to call him and ask him to take leadership because all the other established, so to speak, ministers did not want to confront the power, the white power structure in Alabama. They had been there. And so that's how Dr. King got involved. He wasn't that well known. He had just got there. He was just a young family, rearing his young family. So he wasn't thinking about coming to Montgomery to start a revolution. He was asked to come, and after hearing the plight of men and women at Hope Street Baptist Church, which was around the corner from where our home house is, where my parents and where my grandparents lived on Mason Street, they invited him. My cousin was at that meeting, present at the meeting, and so this is firsthand information that Dr. King listened as they outlined how Negroes at that time had been treated, paying your money at the door, could not go to the movies and all of these things. And here it was, this young, educated man who had studied and believed in nonviolence, thought of ways, they laid many plans on the table. It was Dr. King and E.D. Nixon who really finalized the plan of how they would move about and how they would start the action plan. They call it an action plan.
The action plan was to fight discrimination,
segregation, right, in public accommodations. Now, Fred Gray, who is still living, who was a classmate of mine, was one of the attorneys. Arthur Shore, whose family lived about 2 blocks from my family, he was an attorney. And so I was in Montgomery over the holidays, and they did a profile on those attorneys at that time. 210, they really counted what happened in Montgomery. And so these people got involved with the action plan that Dr. King and the target was the bus, the Montgomery Bus Company.
Because that was public transportation.
Public transportation.
Segregated, and the Supreme Court had held that discrimination was illegal with the Brown
Absolutely.
case decision in
Right, public
1954.
accommodation. That's what Fred Gray. That's what Fred Gray wrote his, started his lawsuit on, and it tells in the Montgomery Advertiser in December 2010 that Fred Gray came to New York and met with Thurgood Marshall and Robert Carter, and they helped him prepare the legal fight in Montgomery.
And of course, the whole thing about the Brown case, the Montgomery bus boycott, the various other civil rights cases, was this is black people's response to the oppression of segregation.
Oh,
Because
absolutely.
the question, we couldn't have or didn't believe in an armed revolution, but the genius of this started by Charles Houston, a former dean at law school
Absolutely, at Howard,
University,
yes.
that said, let's attack it through the Constitution. Let's
Right.
attack it through the 14th and 15th Amendment, because those are the amendments from the Civil War that gave us full citizenship and the rights of citizenship.
Absolutely.
And so therefore, if it violates the Constitution, it's illegal.
Absolutely.
Now, it took at least 20 years, even after the Brown case, for people to really be able to go to schools and get jobs without discrimination. But that is the fact which led then to the Civil Rights Act in 1964. So from 54 to 64, we had a long struggle. And Dr. King and the Montgomery boycott was a pivotal. Now, let's
Absolutely.
tell us about the boycott. Tell us how that
Well, the
worked.
boycott was that people decided, they gathered at these churches around the city of Montgomery to make plans. Churches had began to have their own transportation, such as vans and that. But they said, if we don't have enough cars, we want people who are willing to walk. And so it started off slow, because you got to remember, you're talking to people who had been denied so long, and the power structure. They had to go to work for the power structure people. And if they disobeyed or missed a job, they had nothing. And so it took them a real education job, but they stayed at it. They met night after night after night at churches, daytime, getting people prepared mentally and physically that we're going to do this. And as the weeks and the days and the weeks, more people began to join in. This wasn't people from the north, as they said, the northerns came down and did. These were Alabamians.
Right.
These are people who lived, had worked all their life, had reared their children. These were Alabamians who said, enough is enough. Yes, other people did join, but they were the catalyst of beginning that march, that boycott, and it was successful. Yes, some people did fall by the wayside, but some people and some of the power structure, the majority, the white community, joined in by picking up their workers, their maids, their people who worked for them to make sure that they got to work. And they was harassed, and they were scorned for helping the Negro. But the majority of the people who couldn't get on a van, they walked.
And this lasted for over a year.
Over a year, 365 days. They went to court. The lower court, of course, rejected the case. They went all the way up to the Supreme Court with the case. And Thurgood Marshall and Robert Carter was the counsel to the lawyers in Montgomery.
And of course, the success of the boycott under King's leadership,
propelled him into natural stature.
he had obviously these great oratorical skills.
Absolutely.
But he also had good organizational skills.
Yeah, nobody knew
People
that.
Together.
Nobody knew that when this started. Nobody knew this when it started. But he was young. He had energy. He wasn't caught up in
the
status of politics and all of that. He didn't owe anything to anybody, because Dexter Avenue was a place that could support their minister. So he wasn't beholden to anyone but his congregation. And so he really was propelled in the eyesight of America, to the nation, really, with his strong nonviolence. That was the key. was nonviolence. Whatever they did, they shot in his home. He had to move out of his home. He had death threats, but he stayed the course. We're not going to pick up arms. We're not going to have any guns.
Now, see, that's very interesting because the nonviolent aspect of this is really what made the civil rights.
Absolutely.
That's where many of the white citizens who joined it
Absolutely.
felt that they were doing something, the Lord's work.
Right. You had a
fairness,
missionary, the white ministers, Episcopalian ministers, and some went because some of our own community, we got to remember this, some of our own community did not join right away.
Because they
were afraid of the power structure.
Now, looking to today, many young people and not so young people have forgotten this history of how we broke the barriers of segregation. And sometimes when other issues come up, they are not able to mobilize themselves to fight those issues. We fought them legally, we fought them in the courts, which is legal, of course, we fought them with marches and so on. But now, in 2011, where do we stand? How is this heritage, this history, incorporated into the actions of people today?
Well, I'm pleased to report that in 2010, the NAACP and many other organizations had a 2010 march in response to some of the Tea Party and some of the hatred that had been spewed in the last year. And we went to talk about a civility, that we could debate issues, but we did not need to pick up arms and harm each other. And in our debate, we should be careful. As you know, the healthcare debate showed ugly signs of people who spat on congresspersons and called them all kind of names. That's not what we had fought for in the 20-year period. We fought for a democracy where we could differ, where we could debate, that we could participate in the democratic process, but we did not want the hatred, the oppression, the segregationist kind of mindset to come back again. And so we are fearful that that was going to take place. So many of the unions, students joined in that march in Washington, D.C. to speak out to America that we wanted a democratic process. We wanted debate on issues, but we did not want to come back to hate, where we get so passionate about what we believe. We can't respect other people's ideas and thoughts.
And of course, a couple of weeks before that, Glenn Beck, the television host, had another rally,
right,
which he claimed was for peace, but actually it spewed many of the
absolutely
the criticisms of the establishment, of the left-wingers, and you can take it over, you don't have to. And
give us, we taking our country back. Those are cold words. When the movement, the civil rights law, said that we were all a part of this country. We all participate in the process of making America great. Men and women, African Americans, Caucasian, Native American, Hispanics, they all go to war to fight for this great country. And so segregation was broken down, as you was so much a part of that in the military, in our armed forces. And so when men and women get killed on the battlefield for this country, you don't see African Americans or Hispanic, you see a great American, and they come home as Americans. And so, and blood spill is red. Right. There's no black blood, there's no Hispanic blood, it's red blood. And so we are trying to keep that focus in mind. It's for young people who did not live through this, for people who have been caught up in this recession, losing their homes, no jobs, they're frustrated at this time. And so while they know what is right, they know the history, they understand how we got to where we are today, but they feel like we are at a standstill, at a crossroad. They feel that all that King did
Didn't matter.
Didn't matter. It's not helping them now. But I say to young people when I get a chance to go on high school and college campus doing African American or Negro history, that you are better off than I was. I went to a segregated school. I had pages torn out of my book. I had people to taunt me. Now you can. Although when I stop and look, Dr. Brown, at what's happening now here just in New York, we are moving towards unequal education, segregation. We are about to be the most segregated education institution for elementary and high school in the country.
And this is largely because of our residential segregation.
Absolutely.
So the schools
Housing.
that the
Housing.
kids go to
Right.
are primarily African American.
But I think that if our leadership wanted to do something about that, we could do it.
We could.
We could. Yes, we could.
It's
it
a
takes
question of
willpower.
will.
It's take willpower. It takes fighting political. It takes Manhattan not think it's the golden dream. It takes Queen not to think it, and surely Staten Island not thinking that they are the favorite of New York
Because they're
City.
predominantly white.
Right. And so when you have parents who want to see better education for their children and they get zoned to schools where they're not qualified teachers, who don't want to go into urban schools where there might be a problem, that's where we have to now begin to re-educate the thinking of our parents, the thinking of our political leaders, and for us who know better and know that this will not get us to where we need to be, where King had hoped to leave us and to propel us into the right direction. So we can't be silent on these issues.
Now, one thing that a lot of people don't realize, that even though King preached nonviolence, there were many people who gave their lives in pursuit of civil rights. Emmett Till was killed.
Medgar Evers was killed, right?
Medgar Evers, NAACP was killed.
Right.
So, and King himself was assassinated.
And so was his parent,
and
his mom.
And what happened then?
And Kennedy.
That's right.
Both Kennedys, Bob and Robert.
So all of that, now we don't believe in violence, it shouldn't happen, but sometimes that mobilizes the society to say that things have to change. I mean, what happened in Arizona recently?
Yeah, it was a point.
Causes
Absolutely.
people to understand that things have to change.
Right.
And that the language and the attitudes, because basically this is an attitude.
Oh, absolutely.
Most people in America believe that everybody's about the same and some are better because they have skills, but they basically don't necessarily believe in total segregation. But there is covert racism.
Oh, absolutely.
Where people, based on previous generations and stories have been passed down from one to the other, believe that some people are inherently better. And for black people, whenever we accomplish something, whether it's in the Tuskegee Airmen, or
we accomplish for all Americans.
Whether it's Arthur Ashe or
Right.
whether it's Tiger Woods, white people say, look, they can do it just like us.
Right,
And sometimes we can do it better.
Absolutely.
And that's what we have. Now, if King were alive today, if Dr. King were alive, what do you think he would be doing? Now, this is totally hindsight. What do you think he'd be doing?
I think that he would, as you remember, he came to New York at Riverside Church, and he talked about the Vietnam War.
That's right.
I think that he would absolutely be speaking about the war that has taken so much resources from the human resources that we need in this country today. I think he would speak about that. I think he would absolutely use his bully pulpit to talk about bringing people together, about unity. I think on the health reform, he would have been right out into the community, telling people that it was selfish for us not to think of the million of people who not because of their own, didn't have insurance. It wasn't that they didn't want health insurance. It was the predicament that they were in, but they were Americans. They too deserved, we're a civilized nation. They too deserve quality health care.
See, this is interesting that in that healthcare debate, there were very few civilian leaders speaking
Absolutely.
out.
I believe Dr. King would have used his bully pulpit to speak out about it and make it
A moral issue.
moral issue. And it is a moral issue. Why would anybody in a civilized country not be able to have quality health care? Why is it that all our statistics are showing now that the veterans, the homeless, the growing amount of homeless people, why is it now, I was at a conference in San Domingo just about 2 months ago with Stony Brook and Judge Russell, who is in Buffalo, New York, who now have a veterans court. He first had the substance abuse court. And now, because of the many mental problems that is showing up in veterans, they would. This past year, in 2010, even Congressman Rango had a wonderful conference on veterans in the Congressional Black Caucus, showing where many veterans have not been able to access their checks because of the backlog, because of the bureaucratic, and their mental problems don't have them prepared to fight
And
this.
King would be speaking out.
Absolutely, he would, because it's a moral, it's a political, and it's a right issue.
What do you think he would say about the change in the world situation where so many jobs have left the United States to go to other
overseas.
places where workers are not being paid as much? How do you think he'd approach that?
I think he would be saying to our leaders, not just the President of the United States, but he would be saying to our legislative leaders, he would be saying to our union leaders, come, let us sit down and reason together. That was a beautiful thing about Dr. King. He always wanted people to reason.
Interact,
to sit around a table and reason. That was the strength of Roy Wilkins with the NAACP. People say, well, Roy was too laid back. Well, it takes some calmness at times when tempers are running high and people are so disgusted and dismayed. So it takes people to say, come unions, let's sit down, let's look at it. We want fair wages, because remember, he died for sanitation workers.
Right. But you know, one of the things the King always had, he had the prospect of a boycott. It's
Yes.
like unions have a prospect of a strike.
Right.
So we would reach together, but if this doesn't work, we're
We're
going
gonna
to
do
a
absolutely.
nonviolent
Yeah, but he
boycott.
just did not start there.
Yeah.
He would say to them, these are some options. These are some things that we can do to get where we need to go. And he kept in his back pocket, as people would say, his real stick. But he didn't bring the gun or the bat in the beginning to hold it to people's head or beat them over the head. He brought them in, and they reasoned together. And if he couldn't get them to move, he brought.
And he also went to court. Remember,
Right,
the
the action.
NAACP and the Legal
Absolutely.
Defense Fund really did the legal
Yeah, because
work.
they didn't have any legal in the organization structure, right?
That's right. Now, coming to the close of the program, NAACP, New York State, 2011. What are your objectives?
My objection is to look at education. It is a priority. I believe that knowledge is power. When people know better, they do better. When people understand the political system, the democratic process, and I don't mean the Democratic Party, how they participate in making things better for themselves,
What's
for their children.
NAACP going to do to make it better this year?
Well, we're going to be working with different organizations. Hope that you join us in looking at what can we do to look at the education structure, where we are moving to, charter versus public education, funding, resources,
Qualified teachers.
We're talking about closing of schools. Why are we closing those schools and then coming to an overcrowded situation, a case that we won after some 15 years? Where is the money? How is the money being distributed? We still unequal funding? Is Scarsdale getting more than Roosevelt, New York? Is some other suburban area getting more than Buffalo and Rochester and Yonkers.
So you're going to do this by focusing
Some research, some input from educators, some input from unions, some input from elected officials, so that we can come together and speak in one voice.
and you're going to testify before legislators.
Absolutely.
You're going to lobby legislators.
There's going the city council under Bob Jackson here in New York City is beginning to have hearings. I just sent a letter off to Governor Cuomo on Tuesday, congratulating him. As you know, I worked on his transition committee, and to say to him that I would like to meet with him with our legislative agenda. And education is the top, jobs is second, healthcare. I understand that he's put together a team to look at Medicaid and Medicare, which is a big amount in his budget. But still, we don't want those who are at the bottom to still bear the blunt of any budget. We understand that these are daunting challenges. We understand that the war has just eaten up the budget of this country. And so when we talk about human and resources that we need to assist people, we don't have it. We understand that. But we must find a way. We must reason together. We must disagree. But at the end, we must come out doing that which is better for us as Americans and as this state of New York. We must create jobs, and our people must be ready to take them over. So therefore, we have to have an educated group that is educated so they can be ready for future jobs.
And Dr. Martin Luther King would be so proud of Hazel from Montgomery, Alabama, for providing the leadership of the NAACP. Thanks a lot, Hazel.
Thank you, Dr. Brown.